Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I got all my stuff out and I went out in the garden with the intention of bringing my white pine in and doing some work. And then I thought, actually I'm not going to do much work in here today, it's too cold. It's only 15-16 degrees in here today, and that's with the door to the lounge open to try and get a little bit of daytime heat in here for the orchids obviously. But yeah, so I grabbed this little black pine instead. Now this is an Austrian black pine, and there are so many schools of thought on what to do with black pines that look like this that I'm left with a decision that I can't make because I don't know what to do. So I'm not doing much because I want to leave options open. But what I am going to do is take these long needles off. Now I'm of the school that if you yank needles off, the little embryo bud that sits in between those two needles is liable to be damaged and therefore can't grow. If it's damaged, it can't grow. At the end of the day, having taken the needles off with a pair of scissors, the little stubs that are left will go brown and drop off, leaving that embryo bud the opportunity to actually grow. Now it might not, but at least it has the opportunity. That's my view, and that's based on lots of people talking about it and some doing something about it, and watching people yank needles off left, right and centre and sort of thinking that looks a bit abrupt. Now these needles up here could come into the same category, but not yet. Now this tree needs some movement. Luckily it's pushed out some shoots near the base. Now that gives me something. I'm pretty sure there's more trunk underneath here when I actually repot this in the spring. We'll get it out of this because I don't know what it's in. So I need it out of here. That way we can get the roots to spread out rather than keep going downwards and do all that sort of stuff. So we do have some shoots near the base. Now this is obviously quite flexible, and if I turn it over sideways like this as an initial bend, then I'm going to have this really strong growth here ending up probably pointing upwards. I mean, it could come round there, decision not made yet, but we need to go, the two growths that I've got here, well it's 2.5 because there's a little one there, they're all facing that way. So I need to bend away from there, otherwise they'd be tucked in under the bend, which is a waste of time. So that decides my first bend. There is no choice really, so we've talked our way around that into, we either ignore those and cut them off later, or we include them in the design. If they're included in the design, they need to head away from a bend and not be on the inside of the bend. And then we get to what is my strongest side growth. Now in theory, that could become a new apex at that point. But that doesn't give me many branches, does it? That would be relying on where those needles have been cut off shooting out. But that could, if I go over like that and then twist round like that and chop, that gives me a new apex. But that removes so much greenery that the strength of the tree will be lost. That doesn't mean to say that plan isn't valid. We just leave that top growth to strengthen the trunk and supply some energy for what will become the tree. And I think that's not a bad idea. See, now there's a little cluster of new growths here as well. So we could sort of say, well, let's make that a side branch and choose an apex when these get bigger. But this is going to be a thick branch. Chances are it's going to be thicker than the ones below it, which is a little iffy. Well, it's not a little iffy, it's a lot iffy. You know, potentially the branches should get smaller as you go up the tree. But I mean, I'm looking at a conifer out the window here. That's a real one, not a bonsai, that's a real tree. And there are thicker branches higher up than there are lower down. So it can happen in the real world. It's just, you know, obviously we try and stylize, that's what bonsai is all about. We're mimicking the real world and taking away the unpleasantries of the real world and so that we get an aesthetic, pleasing tree as a bonsai. But they can be too aesthetic and too pleasing in my mind, and too perfect. So although they represent the real species that would be growing in the wild, they don't really, do they? Because that species in the wild would have imperfections. And I like that point. Right, so I'm going to chuck some wire in there. This is my only thick piece of wire at the moment, so it better work. If it doesn't, we'll get a second piece. We have to go extremely careful not to damage those two side shoots. So by the time I get round the trunk, I will be above them. I'm sorry my hand's in the way, but I have to hold the trunk still. There is no other option. Well, I was just going to say, why won't my wire bend? It's hooked up in the curtain, isn't it? So we'll come round. I'm not wiring this tight, I'm wiring this quite loose. And this is a heavy gauge wire that is proving difficult to turn, which is good, because otherwise we won't be able to bend the branch, will we? Or the trunk, in fact. Right, so I now want this to come round under my nice shoot and then go above it, and I'll probably stop there, and then we'll see what we can do with that. Because basically, if I'm going to leave this extension here with its top growth to thicken up everything below it and feed down into there, we've talked about the cycle, where you get this. These are the solar panels up here, the needles. These produce the sugars and starches and things that go down and out into the branches, down into the root system to push the root system out, which takes in nutrients, and it comes back up and pushes all this lot. It's a cycle. It's not a one-way process. A lot of people think, like going back to the orchids again, there's a lot of orchid growers think that the only feed an orchid gets is what you give it in the roots. Well, what happened to photosynthesis then? Bearing in mind they don't get much feed at all in the wild, and it's the photosynthesis that's doing a lot of the work. And it's the same with trees. So we're going to go over there. That we've decided. And this wire is holding quite nicely. This is wobbling a bit in the pot, which implies the roots are down in the pot. And then I'm going to go sideways, and I'm not going to knock my wine glass, or there will be hell to pay. And then I'm going to try and come up to point that branch, which will be a branch, towards us. So that needs to be a bit more abrupt. I need that to head down towards the pot, unfortunately. Right, so we will go over, and we will hopefully get some new growths out of this portion here where those needles came off, and then potentially we will come round and this branch will become our leader. Obviously that will produce, this is destined to grow on. I'm not keeping it as a mini tree. But to allow that to get as much light as possible, I'm going to take that round once more below those tiny little shoots, because they could become branches and be useful, the old solar panels again. So we'll go round there, and the reason I want to do that is because I want that to point away so that it doesn't cast any shadow whatsoever on the piece we're keeping. So we've got to curve away, change of direction, followed by another change of direction, and a potential leader with the growth that's going to produce the energy into the tree, heading off in that direction so that it doesn't overshadow the bits that we want to grow, which are these small pieces here. See, looks like there's a little bud there. That'll be perfect if that grows, because that's on the outside bend. That'll be brilliant. And then we will change direction here, and hopefully this branch will extend and become our new leader, which can then be dealt with. It's got to grow first. So that'll do, quite honestly. I don't need to do any more than that to start with. I mean, the one thing I have realised that I didn't before is watching other people working on pines, that keep a progression. You know, like this is being done in the autumn of 2002. There are people that have done similar things like 5 years ago and have kept tabs with that progressively, and you see that when these young trees like this are given quite tight bends like that, and then you see them in 5 years' time, you sort of think, those bends aren't as tight as they were then, because it's all thickened up and it's moved, it's expanded, you know, everything's got bigger. Gaps between the branches have extended. So if you don't put relatively tight bends on at the beginning, by the time, you know, you get to 10, 15 years, the bends are almost gone. They grow out, basically, through expansion and stuff. So I'm quite happy that I've moved away from there. I've changed direction, and I've got my leader pointing upwards and my main trunk pointing away, with the potential for some new branches here. So now I may change my mind. I may actually keep that as a branch and, you know, put some movement into this part. It depends really what grows and what doesn't. It really does depend on what it does next year. And I haven't got a clue what it's going to do next year. I can only guess. I mean, I can guess that these growths up the top here are going to push on. They'll be quite strong. Smaller one here, and these may push on. These should do. They've got a good start, so should this little one here. Yeah? If I take it off here, I've got so little needle growth left that I've lost my solar panels. I've lost my ability for the tree to feed itself. So this has got to stay for a while. It's got to stay until there is enough growth in this area to actually be self-sufficient and not need this bit so much. So that's what we'll do. So that's all I wanted to do today, really, was just get an initial bend or two into this. I've always said I don't like the trees with the S-bend, but I've also seen a couple of black pines that have been grown as a formal upright, and they work, but to me they don't look as good as the ones that have got movement in the trunk. And that movement can vary from some to extremes and exaggerations, you know, where you get a trunk coming out from the bonsai pot that actually curls over and goes back lower than the bend before it comes round again. It's unlikely that would ever happen with a black pine. Junipers on the mountaintop, yes. Not necessarily a black pine. So yeah, that'll do for now. So it's a bit short and everything, but it's trying to get my head round what this is going to do next. Being a black pine, potentially it's capable of a double flush. We don't know yet. It's an Austrian black pine. It's not a Japanese black pine. They are different part of the world. Other side of the world, in fact. So I'm not sure what this is going to do, whether it will have a double flush. But yeah, that'll do. And we'll see what happens. But I will get it in a bonsai pot next year, purely to start these roots developing in an outward progression rather than a downward progression, and get it out of this, which is probably mud. It came from a nursery. It's probably mud, isn't it? If you watch Tony's video on soggy bottoms, I mean, that's in the orchid world, that's a no-no. That will kill your roots faster than anything. That can kill your roots in weeks, whereas it might take months with a tree. But yeah, you know, unless you've got your trees under shelter, if they're exposed to the heavy rain that we're going to get in the winter, and in a lot of cases we've already had, then if you've got a media that doesn't let the water go through, you'll get a soggy bottom, and those roots are liable to rot. I won't say they will, they're liable to rot. So you need a nice open mix where the water goes through. Downside, you'll water twice as often in the summer months. Well, you have to get a balance, don't you? You can lose your tree because you didn't want to water too often in the summer, in the winter because it got soggy and the roots rotted. So there's a balance there somewhere. Anyway, just a quick visit to this, and certainly not going to do anything else to this until next year, till I see what grows. What's going to push hardest out of this? What's going to produce the maximum bit of growth? Is it going to be this top? Is it going to be this? I suspect that is going to push on quite hard. What will these do? What will these little ones do? And what will these tiny ones down the base of the trunk do? Because I need those to be decent branches. I really do. Otherwise, everything we're going to be working on is from here upwards. And I would hope to at least take this off there at some point, and let's just hope that grows. So, wait and see. That's the game with bonsai, isn't it? There's an awful lot of wait and see. There's an awful lot of let's see what happens next year, or let's wonder what it will look like in 5 years' time. There's an awful lot of patience required. I'm not the most patient person, but with this, you've got to be. You've got to make your plans and then wait to see if that's what happens. And if it doesn't, you might have to change your plan. And if it does, then you've learnt something for other trees in similar situations. So anyway, enough waffle. I've got wine to drink and it's getting late. It'll be dark soon. See you next time. Thanks for dropping by.